The red mark on Elena Vasquez's qualification sheet seemed to burn brighter than the Georgia sun beating down on Fort Moore. 3 weeks into the Army's elite sniper school, and her scores kept falling just short of passing. She blinked hard, trying to clear both sweat and frustration from her eyes. "You're overthinking it, Vasquez," Master Sergeant Reynolds said, his voice neither kind nor unkind, just matter of fact. "Your technical knowledge is solid. Your fieldcraft is good. But when it comes to taking the shot," he tapped the paper where her breathing scores were consistently marked down. "You're hesitating." Elena nodded, keeping her face neutral despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. At 27, she was already older than most candidates in the course. She'd joined the Army after college, a decision that had puzzled her academic parents but had felt right to her. Now, standing in the sweltering heat with failure staring her in the face, doubt crept in for the first time. "Take a break. Think about what I said," Reynolds told her, already turning toward the next student. "We'll try again this afternoon." Elena walked away from the firing range, her rifle, a weapon that had begun to feel like an extension of herself, now heavy across her back. The other students gave her space, sensing her mood. She'd been one of only 3 women to start the course, and now she was the only one left. That fact alone made her stand out, made her failure more visible. She found a patch of shade under a sprawling oak tree and sat with her back against the rough bark. The humidity made her uniform stick to her skin, but she barely noticed. Instead, she pulled out her small notebook where she'd been tracking her performance. Her scores in reconnaissance, camouflage techniques, and ballistic calculations were all well above average. She could recite wind formulas in her sleep. She could lie motionless for hours during stalking exercises, blending into the landscape so well that instructors walked right past her. But when it came time for the final moment, that perfect synthesis of breathing, focus, and trigger squeeze, something kept holding her back. A shadow fell across her notebook. She looked up to see Thomas Chen, one of the few students who'd been consistently friendly. "Rough morning?" he asked, offering her a canteen. She took a sip of water. "Reynolds says I'm overthinking the shot." Chen sat down beside her. "You know what's funny? I get the opposite feedback. They say I'm not thinking enough." He chuckled. "Maybe we can average out and make one good sniper." Elena smiled despite herself. "I don't think it works that way." "Probably not." Chen looked out toward the range. "What happens in your head right before you pull the trigger?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that before, not the instructors, not her previous shooting coaches, no one. She started, then paused, really thinking about it. "I start questioning everything. The wind call, the distance calculation, my position. Even though I've already checked it all, I second-guess myself." Chen nodded. "My dad used to tell me something when he taught me to hunt. He said, there's a moment when you have to stop being the thinker and just be the doer. Maybe that's your problem. You never make that switch." "Maybe," she said, turning the idea over in her mind. "Anyway," Chen said, standing up, "don't count yourself out yet. Reynolds is tough on everyone." As Chen walked away, Elena flipped to a new page in her notebook and wrote down his words. "Stop being the thinker. Be the doer." It seemed too simple, but maybe that was exactly what she needed. Simplicity. The afternoon session went better. Elena focused on Chen's advice, trying to find that moment to switch from analysis to action. Her groupings tightened, though still not enough to meet the standard. Progress, but not salvation. That night in the barracks, while most students were already asleep, exhausted from the day's training, Elena lay awake. Tomorrow was the mid-course evaluation. Pass or fail, continue or go home. Her thoughts drifted to her childhood. Growing up in a small New Mexico town, she'd learned to shoot from her grandfather. He'd been a police officer his entire career, and he'd taught her that shooting wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about responsibility and respect for what the bullet could do. "The moment you decide to pull that trigger," he'd told her once, "you're making a choice that can't be undone. So be damn sure before you make it." Was that her problem? Was she too aware of the weight of that choice? Morning came too soon. The evaluations would cover everything they'd learned so far, culminating in a series of shots at varied distances with time pressure added. Elena's stomach twisted with nerves as she prepared her gear. At the range, Reynolds assigned shooting lanes. "Vasquez, you're on 6, he said, then added more quietly, Clear your head today. Trust your training. She nodded, surprised by the almost encouraging tone. As she set up her position, she went through her mental checklist. Scope zeroed. Wind flags observed. Distance calculated. Breathing pattern established. The first target appeared at 300 meters. Easy. She took the shot and hit just off center. Not perfect, but within standards. The second target, 500 meters. Another hit, better this time. Her confidence began to build. Then came the third target, 700 meters. The wind picked up, shifting directions. Elena recalculated, adjusted her aim, and prepared to fire. But as her finger touched the trigger, doubt flooded in. The wind seemed to be shifting again. Should she adjust? Was her reading wrong? She hesitated, then took the shot. Miss. She tried to recenter herself for the next target, but her focus was shattered. Another miss. And another. By the final target, she knew she'd failed. As students cleared their weapons and prepared to move to the next evaluation station, Reynolds approached her lane. What happened, Vasquez? He asked, his voice low. I lost confidence on the third target, sir, she admitted. The wind shifted and I second-guessed my adjustment. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. You know what makes a sniper different from other shooters? He asked. It's not just accuracy. It's decision-making under pressure. When to take the shot, when to hold, and once the decision is made, he snapped his fingers. Full commitment. Yes, sir. I've seen shooters with natural talent wash out because they couldn't handle the mental game, he continued, and I've seen average shooters become exceptional because they mastered their thoughts. He tapped his temple. The battlefield is here first. Elena nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Report to my office after the day's evaluations, Reynolds said, then walked away to check the next lane. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Elena went through the motions of each station. Land navigation, camouflage assessment, target identification, knowing that her performance at the range had likely already sealed her fate. At sundown, she knocked on Reynolds' office door. Come in, his voice called from inside. The office was small and utilitarian, with maps covering one wall and a bookshelf filled with military manuals on another. Reynolds gestured for her to sit. I've reviewed your scores, he said without preamble. Your range performance today wasn't up to standard. I understand, sir, Elena said. Her voice steady despite the disappointment crushing down on her. That said, your scores in every other area are exceptional. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. You have the makings of a fine soldier, Vasquez. Just not a sniper. The words stung, but they weren't unexpected. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. Reynolds nodded. You'll report back to your unit tomorrow. I'm recommending you for advanced reconnaissance training. Your observation skills and fieldcraft are too valuable to waste. It was a consolation prize, but a decent one. Advanced recon specialists were highly respected. One more thing, Reynolds said as she stood to leave. The mental block you have, that hesitation, it might serve you well in some situations. A sniper has to be decisive, yes, but sometimes that split second of doubt is the difference between a justified shot and a mistake you can't take back. He looked at her directly. Remember that. Later that night, while the other remaining candidates celebrated making it halfway through the course, Elena packed her gear. Her dream of becoming a sniper was over. Yet somehow Reynolds' final words kept echoing in her mind. Maybe failing wasn't just about what she couldn't do. Maybe it was pointing her toward what she was meant to do instead. As she folded her camouflage uniform and placed it in her duffel bag, Elena realized something surprising. She felt lighter. The constant pressure to overcome her hesitation had been wearing her down for weeks. Now, paradoxically, accepting this failure opened up new possibilities. Tomorrow, she would leave Fort Moore as a sniper school washout. But perhaps in ways she couldn't yet see, this ending was just the beginning of something else, something she might be better suited for after all. She glanced one last time at her notebook, still open to the page where she'd written Chen's advice. Stop being the thinker. Be the doer. Below it, she added a new line. Or maybe sometimes the thinking is exactly what's needed. 18 months could change a lot. Elena Vasquez had learned that lesson well. The mountain air bit at her cheeks as she lay perfectly still in her hide, a shallow depression covered with local vegetation that she'd spent 3 hours perfecting. Through her spotting scope, she watched the valley below where morning mist still clung to the trees. Her breath formed small clouds that quickly disappeared in the cold. Movement. 2 o'clock near the tree line, she whispered into her radio. Beside her, Corporal Daniels adjusted his rifle slightly. I see it. Civilian looks like. Checking traps, maybe. Elena focused her scope. The figure moved with purpose, checking something every 50 meters or so along the forest edge. Definitely checking traps. No weapon visible. She made a quick note in her waterproof notebook, marking the time and location. This was their 3rd day observing this valley in Eastern Europe, part of a NATO peacekeeping mission that had grown increasingly tense over the past weeks. The 10th Mountain Division had deployed 4 months ago to monitor separatist activities near a disputed border region. What was supposed to be a show of presence had evolved into something more complex as reports of arms smuggling and civilian intimidation increased. Elena's role as a reconnaissance specialist put her at the front of these observation missions. After washing out of sniper school, she'd thrown herself into mastering the skills that had earned her Reynolds recommendation: fieldcraft, intelligence gathering, and terrain analysis. She'd become known for her meticulous reports and uncanny ability to spot patterns that others missed. We should move positions before noon, she said, after the trapper disappeared back into the trees. This hide's good, but we've been here too long. Daniels nodded, already beginning to carefully pack his gear. At 22, he was 5 years younger than Elena, but had quickly proven himself reliable since joining her team 2 months ago. He respected her experience without questioning the fact that she'd failed sniper qualification, something that couldn't be said for everyone. They moved with practiced efficiency, leaving no trace of their presence. Elena led them 2 kilometers east, higher up the ridgeline, where they could observe a different section of the valley, particularly the old logging road that intelligence suggested was being used for smuggling operations. By mid-afternoon, they were settled in their new position. Elena checked in with base via secure radio, confirming their location and reporting the morning's observations. Nothing unusual so far, but instinct told her something was off about this area. The civilian patterns seemed too regular, too careful. You've got that look again, Daniel said as she finished the transmission. What look? The one where you're seeing something the rest of us aren't. Elena smiled slightly. Just thinking. There's been too much civilian activity for a place supposedly abandoned after the border dispute started. These aren't just people checking family homes or gathering belongings. They're operating here regularly. Daniels peered through his scope toward the valley. Cover for something else? Maybe. Elena pulled out her map, tracing the contours of the land with her finger. There's that old factory complex near the river bend. Satellite imagery shows it as inactive, but I'd like to get eyes on it. That'd put us pretty close to the restricted zone, Daniels reminded her. We stay on our side, Elena said, but we need to see what's happening there. Let's move at dusk. The remaining hours of daylight crawled by. They took turns keeping watch, eating cold rations and resting. As the shadows lengthened and the light faded to a deep blue, they packed up again and began their careful movement toward the river. The terrain grew steeper and more challenging as they approached. Old-growth forest gave way to younger trees and eventually scrubby undergrowth that offered less cover. Elena moved slowly, testing each step before committing her weight, alert for tripwires or surveillance equipment. The factory came into view just as true darkness settled. It was larger than Elena had expected, a sprawling complex of concrete buildings with broken windows and rusting metal. But something wasn't right. Hold up, she whispered, dropping to one knee. Daniels froze beside her. What is it? Elena pointed to the largest building. Power. Look at the windows on the east side, 2nd floor. It was barely perceptible, a faint glow that might have been moonlight reflecting off glass, except the angle was wrong. Someone was inside using minimal lighting. Good catch, Daniels murmured. Want to get closer? Elena considered their options. Their orders were to observe and report, not engage. But if the factory was active, it represented a significant intelligence opportunity. We'll circle around to the north side, she decided. There's better cover there, and we can set up an observation post with clear sight lines to most of the complex. It took them nearly an hour to navigate the difficult terrain in darkness. Elena moved with the patience that had become her trademark, never rushing even when the route seemed clear. Every few minutes they would stop completely, listening to the night sounds around them, making sure they were still alone. Their caution paid off. As they approached the northern perimeter of the factory grounds, Elena spotted movement, two figures carrying what looked like heavy cases from a small truck into one of the outbuildings. They retreated to a safe distance and found a suitable hide location in a dense thicket that overlooked the complex. Using night vision equipment, they began documenting the activity. Over the next 4 hours, they observed a pattern of vehicles arriving, unloading equipment, and departing. None had military markings, but the behavior was clearly organized and security-conscious. "This isn't just local separatists," Daniels said as they watched another truck depart. "This is too sophisticated." Elena nodded, her mind already cataloging the details. The equipment cases were consistent with communications gear. The personnel moved with discipline that suggested training. The security patterns included regular perimeter checks. "We need to get closer," she said finally. Daniels glanced at her sharply. "That's pushing our orders." "Our orders are to gather intelligence on separatist activities," Elena replied calmly. "That's what we're doing." Before he could object further, she continued, "I'll go alone. You maintain position here as overwatch. If I'm not back in 40 minutes, you head back to the rendezvous point and report what we've seen." Daniels clearly didn't like it, but he nodded. 40 minutes. Not a minute more." Elena removed everything non-essential from her gear, keeping only her sidearm, knife, night vision, and a small camera. She checked her watch, synchronized with Daniels, and then began her approach. The factory grounds were poorly maintained, with broken concrete and overgrown weeds providing both challenges and cover. Elena moved like a shadow, using every available concealment, freezing whenever perimeter guards passed nearby. Her target was a low outbuilding attached to the main factory that seemed to be a focus of activity. As she drew closer, she could hear the hum of generators and, more surprisingly, what sounded like cooling fans, the kind used for high-end electronics. The building had a row of windows along one side, most broken or missing entirely. Elena approached the darkest section, where the wall was in shadow, and carefully raised her head just enough to peek inside. What she saw made her heart rate spike. The interior was transformed from whatever industrial purpose it once served into a modern command center. Computer workstations lined one wall. In the center stood a sophisticated communications array, definitely military grade. A large map on the wall showed the surrounding region, with markers and annotations she couldn't quite make out from her position. Most telling of all was a stack of crates in the corner bearing markings Elena recognized immediately. Not local separatist symbols, but the military code of a neighboring nation that officially denied any involvement in the conflict. She carefully documented everything with her camera, making sure to capture the equipment types and markings. This wasn't just separatist activity. This was evidence of state-sponsored intervention, a much more serious situation with international implications. Elena had seen enough. She began her careful withdrawal, moving even more cautiously than before. The information she carried now would likely change the entire mission. Parameters for their unit. She had nearly reached the perimeter when she heard voices approaching. 2 guards on a patrol route she hadn't observed before. Elena pressed herself flat against the ground behind a concrete barrier, controlling her breathing just as she'd been taught in sniper school. The guards passed within 3 meters of her position, close enough that she could smell cigarette smoke and hear their conversation, complaints about the cold and comments about a supply delivery expected the next day. Elena remained motionless until they were well past, then continued her extraction. She reached Daniels with 7 minutes to spare on their agreed timeline. "You're not going to believe what I found," she whispered as they immediately began withdrawing from the area. They moved through the night for hours, putting safe distance between themselves and the factory, before stopping to rest just before dawn. Elena transmitted a priority code to base requesting immediate extraction due to critical intelligence, careful to include no specific details over the radio. As they waited at the extraction point, Elena reviewed the images she'd captured. The equipment, the markings, the setup, it all pointed to a level of organization and external support that went far beyond what their intelligence briefings had suggested. "Whatever's happening there, it's big," Daniel said, looking over her shoulder at the camera display. Elena nodded, her mind already working through the implications. This isn't just separatists trying to control territory. This is a coordinated operation with outside backing, the kind that could trigger a much larger conflict if it's not handled carefully. The sound of helicopter rotors reached them just as the morning sun crested the mountains. As they prepared for extraction, Elena took one last look toward the valley, where the factory lay hidden. The quiet reconnaissance specialist who had once failed sniper school had just uncovered what might be the most significant intelligence find of the entire operation. And somehow she couldn't help but think that her failure had led her exactly where she needed to be. The helicopter touched down, and as they climbed aboard, Elena's commander met her with an urgent expression. "What did you find, Vasquez?" "Evidence of direct foreign military support, sir. Communications equipment command center, the works. They're setting up for something big." His face grew grim as she handed over her camera. "Good work. Both of you get some rest. I have a feeling things are about to get very complicated." As the helicopter lifted off, Elena felt a strange mix of pride and apprehension. Her discovery would change the mission, and possibly the fate of the entire region. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Elena's discovery changed everything. Within hours of their return to base, the small NATO outpost transformed into a hive of activity. Intelligence officers questioned her and Daniels repeatedly about what they'd seen at the factory. Satellite imagery was pulled, maps were updated, and secure communications buzzed with encrypted messages to higher command. Captain Rivera, their unit commander, called Elena into the Tactical Operations Center that evening. The room was dimly lit, with screens showing various feeds of the border region. Several officers Elena didn't recognize stood around a central table displaying a detailed map of the area surrounding the factory. "Specialist Vasquez," Rivera nodded as she entered. "These gentlemen are from NATO intelligence. They'd like to hear directly from you about what you observed." A tall man with graying hair stepped forward. "Colonel Walsh, NATO Joint Intelligence Group. Impressive work out there, Specialist." "Thank you, sir," Elena replied, standing at attention. "At ease," Walsh said. "Walk us through exactly what you saw." For the next 20 minutes, Elena detailed everything: the pattern of vehicles, the communications equipment, the military crates with foreign markings, the map she'd glimpsed on the wall. The officers interrupted occasionally with specific questions about numbers, timings, and equipment types. When she finished, Walsh exchanged glances with Rivera. "Your report confirms what we've suspected but couldn't prove. This isn't just local separatists. This is a coordinated operation with direct foreign support." He turned to the map, pointing to the factory. "We believe they're establishing a forward command post for expanded operations. The communications array you identified matches specialized equipment used for coordinating larger forces across multiple sectors." Elena studied the map, noting how the factory's position controlled access to several key valleys and transport routes. "They're preparing for something bigger." "Exactly," Walsh nodded. "And thanks to your intelligence, we now have time to respond." Rivera stepped closer. "Specialist Vasquez, we need to maintain observation of that facility. Your familiarity with the terrain makes you invaluable for this operation. We're setting up a 4-person surveillance team, and I want you to lead it." Elena felt a rush of both pride and apprehension. Leading a surveillance team was a significant responsibility, especially given the high-stakes situation. "Yes, sir," she replied. "When do we deploy?" "Tomorrow at 0400, Rivera said. "You'll establish a concealed observation post and maintain surveillance for up to 5 days. We need to document all activity, particularly any military equipment or personnel movements." "Understood, sir." Walsh added, "This is strictly observation only. Your team is not to engage or approach the facility again. The diplomatic channels are working this situation, but we need eyes on the ground to verify compliance with any agreements reached." Elena nodded, already mentally planning the mission. "Who's on my team?" "Daniel, since he's already familiar with the situation, plus Rodriguez for communications and Wong for additional security, all experienced in covert operations." After the briefing, Elena gathered her team to prepare their gear and review the mission parameters. The plan was straightforward. Establish a hidden observation post with line of sight to the factory, document all activity, and report back every 6 hours unless something critical developed. "Pack for extended cold weather operations," she told them as they checked their equipment. "The forecast shows temperatures dropping below freezing at night. We'll need to remain in position regardless of conditions. Rodriguez, a communications specialist with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, nodded as he packed extra batteries for their equipment. How close are we getting to that factory? Not as close as last time, Elena answered. There's a ridgeline about 800 meters from the complex that gives good visibility, while keeping us safely concealed. We'll set up there. Wong, a stocky soldier with 7 years of experience in special reconnaissance, studied the topographic map. Single observation post or multiple? Primary and secondary, Elena decided. 2-person shifts rotating every 6 hours to maintain alertness. Full team briefings at each rotation to ensure everyone has the same operational picture. By dawn the next morning, they were already moving through the forested hillsides toward their objective. Elena led them along a different route than she'd used previously, avoiding the paths that might now be under surveillance after her earlier discovery. The weather had turned colder overnight, with a biting wind that cut through their layers. Occasional flurries of snow reduced visibility, but Elena navigated confidently, using landmarks and her compass to maintain their course. They reached the planned observation point shortly before noon. The ridgeline offered excellent visibility of the factory complex while providing natural concealment among a cluster of large boulders and dense evergreen vegetation. Perfect, Wong murmured as they surveyed the position. Natural drainage to prevent water buildup, multiple escape routes if needed. Elena nodded, already setting up the high-powered observation scope. Rodriguez, establish communications with base. Daniels, help me map out sectors for systematic observation. Wong, secure our perimeter and set up early warning measures. The team worked efficiently, and within an hour they had a fully functional observation post. Their position was nearly invisible from below, with carefully arranged natural materials breaking up their outline against the skyline. Through the scope, Elena could see the factory clearly. Activity had increased significantly since her previous observation. More vehicles were present, including 2 military-style trucks without markings. Personnel moved with purpose between buildings, carrying equipment and supplies. Definitely ramping up operations, Daniels commented as he took notes. I count at least 15 individuals on site now compared to the 8 we saw before. Elena focused the scope on the main building entrance. They've added security too. Armed guards at all access points now. For the next several hours they documented everything methodically. Vehicle movements, personnel patterns, equipment transfers. Rodriguez transmitted their observations back to base using encrypted communications, keeping their command updated on the developing situation. As darkness fell on their first day, Elena and Wong took the first watch shift while Daniels and Rodriguez rested in their concealed shelter, a small, camouflage space barely large enough for 2 people to lie down. You think this will end peacefully? Wong asked quietly as they scanned the now illuminated factory grounds through night vision devices. Elena considered the question. Hard to say. Depends on what they're really planning and how much evidence we can gather to pressure a diplomatic solution. You've got good instincts, Wong said. Finding that place when you did might have prevented something worse. Elena smiled slightly. Just doing my job. The night passed slowly, with regular activity continuing at the factory even through the darkest hours. Something was definitely building. They observed 3 more unmarked trucks arriving shortly after midnight, unloading large crates that required multiple people to carry. By morning of the 3rd day, the pattern had become clear. The facility was being prepared as a forward operating base, with communications equipment, supplies, and what appeared to be weapons being stockpiled. Elena was documenting a new shipment arrival when Rodriguez scrambled over from the communications gear, his expression urgent. Message fro. Command, he said quietly. Diplomatic situation is deteriorating. Negotiations broke down when the other side denied any military presence in the region. Elena frowned. We have photographic evidence. They're claiming the evidence is fabricated. Meanwhile, satellite imagery shows increased military activity 20 kilometers east of the border. They might be preparing to move more forces into this area under the guise of peacekeeping. This complicated their mission significantly. If larger forces moved in, their small observation team could find themselves caught between opposing military units. Any change to our orders? Elena asked. Rodriguez shook his head. Continue observation. Document everything in detail. Command wants irrefutable evidence to present at Emergency Security Council meetings. Elena nodded and returned to the scope. The pressure of their mission had just increased dramatically. Their intelligence could now be crucial to preventing a wider conflict. On the morning of the fourth day, something unexpected happened. A small convoy of 3 civilian vehicles approached the factory from the west, a direction they hadn't seen traffic from before. Through her scope, Elena could see they weren't military or separatist vehicles, but ordinary cars and a small bus. That's not their usual pattern, she murmured, adjusting the focus for a better view. The vehicle stopped at what appeared to be a newly established checkpoint about 200 meters from the main facility. Armed guards approached the lead car. Rodriguez, get on comms. Tell base we have civilian vehicles being stopped by armed personnel near the facility. Elena watched intently as the occupants were ordered out of their vehicles. She counted 12 civilians, including what appeared to be 2, wearing the distinctive vests of international aid workers. This doesn't look good, Daniel said, watching through his own optics. Those civilians are being detained. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. They're being taken into the facility. Rodriguez, update command immediately. We have approximately 12 civilians, including aid workers, being detained by armed personnel at the factory complex. The situation was evolving from an intelligence-gathering operation into something potentially much worse, a hostage situation. Elena's team watched helplessly as the civilians were escorted into the main building, while their vehicles were searched thoroughly by armed guards. Orders from command, Rodriguez reported after a tense radio exchange. Maintain observation, report all developments. A quick reaction force is being put on standby, but they're still hours away if deployed. Elena nodded grimly. Let's document everything. Those civilians' safety might depend on what we report. As the day progressed, Elena's team observed increased activity around the complex. More armed personnel appeared, taking up defensive positions. The civilian vehicles were moved inside a garage structure out of sight. They're preparing for something, Wong observed. This wasn't a random checkpoint stop. They were waiting for those vehicles, Elena agreed. The timing was too convenient, especially given the diplomatic tensions. They might be using the civilians as leverage or human shields if they expect military action against them. By nightfall, the situation had become a tense standoff. Through thermal imaging, they could occasionally glimpse the civilians being moved between rooms in the main building, confirming they were still inside. Armed guards had doubled in number, and communications activity had increased dramatically. We're the only eyes on this situation, Elena told her team during a brief huddle. Whatever happens next, our observations could be critical for those civilians' safety. None of them slept that night, maintaining constant watch over the factory as the hours ticked by. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Those civilians' lives might depend on what her team reported and how NATO responded. As dawn broke on the 5th day, Elena received a priority message from command. The diplomatic situation had reached a critical point. Evidence of the foreign military presence had been presented internationally, and the opposing nation was facing significant pressure to withdraw support from the separatists. The timing couldn't be more delicate. With civilian hostages now in the equation, any military response carried tremendous risk. Elena looked through her scope at the factory below, where 12 innocent people were being held against their will. What had begun as a simple reconnaissance mission had evolved into a potential flashpoint that could determine not just the fate of those hostages, but the future of the entire region. The siege had begun, and Elena's team was right in the middle of it. 12 hours into the hostage situation, Elena's observation team received new orders. The secure radio crackled as Captain Rivera's voice came through. Vasquez, situation update. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing, but intelligence suggests the separatists plan to move the hostages within the next few hours. Once split up and relocated, rescue becomes nearly impossible. Elena exchanged glances with her team members. They'd been watching the factory complex through the night, documenting guard rotations and movement patterns. The civilians hadn't been brought outside since their initial capture, but increased activity suggested preparations for transport. A quick reaction force is en route, Rivera continued, but they're still at least 40 minutes out, weather permitting. Your team is authorized to take limited action if necessary to delay hostage transport until QRF arrives. The weight of those words settled heavily on Elena. Limited action could mean many things, but the implication was clear. They might need to intervene directly to prevent the hostages from being moved. "Understood, sir," she replied. "What are our parameters?" "Prevent transport of hostages without direct engagement if possible. If engagement becomes necessary, you're authorized to use minimum force required. Mission priority is hostage safety." "Copy that. Any intel on their numbers or armaments?" "Latest estimate is 15 to 20 armed personnel, mixed small arms. 2 of the hostages have been identified as international aid workers from the Red Cross. The others appear to be local civilians." After signing off, Elena gathered her team in their concealed position. "You all heard that. We need options to delay any transport without endangering the hostages." Rodriguez adjusted his communications gear. "We could try to disable their vehicles remotely. I've got limited electronic countermeasure equipment. Too unreliable from this distance," Wong countered. "And if it fails, they'll know someone's out here." Daniels studied the complex through his scope. "What about creating a diversion? Something to make them think it's unsafe to move right now?" Elena considered this. "Possible, but risky. Anything dramatic enough to delay them might also make them nervous enough to harm hostages." She turned back to her own scope, methodically scanning the complex again. Through the powerful optics, she could see the vehicles being prepared in what had once been a loading area. 3 unmarked vans, engines being checked, fuel added. Guards stood in pairs at all access points, weapons ready. Then she spotted him. A tall man with a distinctive red scarf around his neck, gesturing forcefully as he directed the others. He moved with authority, his hand motion sharp and commanding. Others responded immediately to his orders. "I've got eyes on who appears to be their leader," she said. "Red scarf, north side of the main building. He's coordinating the transport preparations." Daniels shifted his scope. "I see him. Definitely in charge from how the others are responding." Rodriguez had been monitoring intercepted communications. "That matches what I'm hearing on their frequencies. Voice profile of the primary commander has a distinctive pattern. They're calling him Volk, Wolf." Elena watched as the commander paced near the building entrance, periodically checking his watch. He was growing impatient, his movements becoming more agitated. "They're definitely preparing to move soon," she said. "We need to make a decision." The team fell silent, each weighing the gravity of their situation. They were just 4 soldiers against a much larger force. Any direct action carried enormous risk, to themselves, to the mission, and most critically to the hostages. Elena's mind raced through their limited options. A diversion might delay things but could spook the separatists into harming hostages. Attempting to disable vehicles could alert them to outside presence. Direct communication might escalate the situation internationally. There was one other option, but it required precision that few soldiers could manage, especially under these conditions. A carefully placed shot could disable key equipment or create confusion without directly threatening lives. "Daniels," she said quietly, "your sniper qualification scores. How were they?" He looked at her with understanding dawning in his eyes. "Top of my class at long-range precision fire. But Elena, that's a shot of over 800 meters in variable wind conditions." She nodded. "I know. But if we target something non-human, communications equipment, vehicle, something critical to their operation, we could create enough confusion to delay transport without directly threatening anyone." Wong raised an eyebrow. "That's threading a very fine needle." "One mistake." "I know the risks," Elena said firmly, "but we're running out of options and time." Rodriguez checked his watch. "QRF is still at least 35 minutes out, assuming no delays. I'm picking up increased chatter on their frequencies. They're definitely moving soon." Elena made her decision. "We go with a precision shot to disable critical equipment." "Daniels, you're our best marksman. What's your assessment?" Daniels studied the complex carefully through his scope, calculating variables. "Wind is gusting between 5-8 knots, shifting direction between the ridgelines. Temperature dropping. It's at the edge of reliable precision range." He paused, then added more quietly, "I can make the shot. But we need to identify the perfect target, something that would cause maximum disruption with minimum risk." Elena returned to her scope, scanning methodically for potential targets. Vehicles were an option, but disabling one might not stop them from using the others. The communications antenna on the roof was too hard to damage effectively with a single shot. Then she saw it. The commander with the red scarf had stepped outside again, barking orders into a handheld radio. That was their command and control link. The radio, she said. Their commander's radio. It's their communication hub for coordinating the transport. Disable that and they'll have to regroup, establish new communications protocols. Daniels adjusted his scope, finding the target. That's a small target at this range, but he studied it carefully. Possible, if he stays still long enough. Wang looked skeptical. Even if you hit it, they have backups. Yes, Elena agreed, but they'll need time to distribute them, establish new frequencies, regroup. That buys precious minutes for the QRF. They watched as the commander paced near the vehicle, still coordinating through his radio. Elena could see the hostages now, being brought out from the main building in a tight group surrounded by armed guards. Time was running out. Make your calculations, she told Daniels. We take the shot when you're ready. As Daniels prepared, Elena felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She remembered sniper school, the pressure of qualification day, the way she'd frozen when it mattered most. Now she was putting their mission in the hands of someone else's shooting skills, the very skills she'd failed to master. Rodriguez, alert command that we're initiating a limited action to delay hostage transport, she ordered. Wang, be ready to observe and report all reactions after the shot. Rodriguez made the call while Daniels settled into position. He adjusted his rifle minutely, checking and rechecking his calculations. Elena watched him work, recognizing the methodical precision she'd never quite mastered herself. Wind shifting, Daniels murmured. Need to wait for a stable pattern. Elena returned to her observation scope, watching the commander. He was standing near the lead vehicle now, radio in hand, gesturing toward the hostages with his other hand. One of the aid workers had collapsed to their knees, and rather than help, the commander was shouting angrily. They're getting rough with the hostages, she reported. We may not have much time. Daniels took a slow, controlled breath. Almost there. Need him to stay still for just a few seconds. The commander had stopped moving momentarily, focused on his radio transmission. Elena could see his mouth moving rapidly as he issued orders. Now? She asked. Not yet, Daniels whispered, waiting for the right respiratory pause. Elena felt seconds stretching into eternity as they watched. The first hostages were being loaded into the rear vehicle. The QRF was still too far away. Everything hinged on this moment. Wind stable, Daniels murmured. Target stationary. He took one final breath, held it at the natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger. The shot broke the morning stillness, the sound echoing across the valley. Through her scope, Elena watched as the bullet traveled for what seemed like forever before finding its mark. The radio in the commander's hand exploded into fragments. He jumped backward, clutching his hand, his weapon falling to the ground as he shouted in shock and pain. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The separatists, believing they were under attack, scattered for cover. The hostage loading stopped instantly as guards took defensive positions, scanning for threats. The commander was shouting orders, but without his radio, coordination collapsed into chaos. Direct hit, Elena confirmed, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Radio destroyed. Commander appears injured but mobile, likely just superficial wounds from the radio fragments. They're pulling the hostages back inside, Wang reported. Transport halted. They're establishing a defensive perimeter. Rodriguez was already updating command. QRF reports ETA now 28 minutes. They're advising we maintain observation only. No additional actions unless hostages are in immediate danger. Elena nodded, feeling a rush of relief mixed with tension. They'd bought valuable time, but the situation remained incredibly volatile. Daniels, that was an incredible shot, she said quietly. He gave a tight smile. Textbook breathing control and trigger squeeze. Just like they taught us. Elena felt a pang of recognition. The very skills she'd struggled with at sniper school had just possibly saved 12 lives. But there was no time to dwell on that now. They'll regroup soon, she warned. Once they realize there's no follow-up attack, they'll try again to move the hostages. We need to be ready. For the next 20 minutes, they observed the frantic activity below. The separatists had pulled everyone inside the main building, establishing heavier guard positions at all entrances. Through windows, Elena could occasionally glimpse the hostages being kept in what appeared to be a central room. The commander with the red scarf was still in charge, but now used runners to communicate between positions. His hand was bandaged, and his movements were filled with agitation and anger. "They're arguing about what to do," Rodriguez reported, monitoring what communications he could intercept from their backup channels. "Some want to move immediately on alternate routes. Others want to wait until they're sure it's safe." "The commander?" Elena asked. "Seems to be pushing to move based on the response patterns. But there's disagreement." This was exactly what they'd hoped for: confusion, delay, disruption of plans. Every minute gained brought the QRF closer. "QRF reports 10 minutes out," Rodriguez updated. "They're requesting final situation report and any changes to hostile force positions." Elena provided a detailed breakdown of what they were observing: guard positions, visible weapons, hostage location, vehicle status, everything the QRF would need for a successful operation. As they waited for rescue forces to arrive, Elena reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. Her failure at sniper school had led to a specialization in reconnaissance. That specialization had put her in position to discover this facility, and now she was coordinating a potential rescue operation that hinged on the very skills she'd once failed to master. "Movement at the east entrance," Wong reported suddenly. "They're bringing out 3 hostages." Elena refocused her scope. 3 civilians, including one of the aid workers, were being escorted to the vehicles by armed guards. The commander with the red scarf was supervising, gesturing angrily. "They're splitting the hostages," she realized with alarm. "Beginning transport with a smaller group first." Rodriguez immediately relayed this to command. The response came back quickly. "QRF still 7 minutes out. Maintain observation. Do not engage unless hostages face imminent harm." Elena watched as the first hostages were pushed toward the lead vehicle. The commander stood nearby, shouting at his men to hurry. The QRF wouldn't arrive in time to prevent at least some of the hostages from being moved. Once separated, rescue would become exponentially more difficult. Elena faced the hardest decision of her career: follow orders to observe only, or take action that could save lives but risk escalation. As she watched the frightened civilians being roughly handled, Elena made her choice. "Daniels," she said quietly, "prepare for one more shot." Time seemed to slow as Elena watched the hostages being forced toward the vehicles. The commander with the red scarf shouted orders, his injured hand wrapped in a hasty bandage, his face twisted with anger. Every second brought the civilians closer to being separated and taken away. "Daniels," Elena said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "I need options, non-lethal. What can you hit that would cause maximum disruption with minimum risk to hostages?" Daniel scanned the scene through his scope, calculating. "Vehicle tires are possible but unpredictable. Might cause a crash if they try to drive anyway." Elena's mind raced through alternatives. What about the ground near the commander? A warning shot? Too easily misinterpreted as a miss, Wong cautioned. Could lead to them harming hostages in retaliation. Rodriguez was still monitoring communications. "QRF reports 5 minutes out. They're asking us to hold unless lives are in immediate danger." Elena made her decision. "We need a shot that communicates clearly but doesn't threaten lives. Something that tells them we could have taken a lethal shot but chose not to." She returned to her scope, analyzing the scene methodically. The commander was now standing by the lead vehicle's driver door, gesturing for the hostages to be loaded into the second vehicle. His rifle was slung across his back, unused. In his good hand, he held a new radio, a replacement for the one Daniels had destroyed. "The replacement radio," Elena said. "Same target as before. It sends cars at will. It's precise enough to avoid injury, but significant enough to delay them." Daniels adjusted his position, recalculating for the slightly different angle. "It's a small target. Wind has picked up since the last shot. Can you make it?" Elena asked simply. Daniels took a slow breath. "Yes." "Take the shot when ready." As Daniels prepared, Elena continued observing the scene. The first group of hostages was being secured in the second vehicle. The commander was shouting into his radio, coordinating with guards inside the building. Time was running out. "Wind shifting," Daniels murmured. "Need to time this perfectly." Elena watched as the commander paced beside the vehicle, radio in hand. The first vehicle's engine had started, a driver behind the wheel ready to move. "Target acquired," Daniels whispered. Waiting for stable conditions, Elena held her breath. The timing had to be perfect. Disrupt their operations without endangering the hostages. Too early or too late could be catastrophic. The commander stopped moving, standing beside the vehicle door as he held the radio to his mouth, issuing what appeared to be final instructions before departure. Daniels exhaled slowly, his finger taking up the slack in the trigger. Taking the shot, the rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the valley. Elena tracked the bullet's path through her scope as it traveled the 800 meters to its target. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it would miss. Then the radio in the commander's hand exploded into fragments, just as the first one had. This time, Elena saw the commander's face transform from anger to shock and then to fear. He dropped to the ground, shouting orders as he scrambled for cover. The effect on the separatists was immediate and even more dramatic than before. The second precision strike on the same target sent a clear message. They were being watched by someone with extraordinary shooting skills who could have targeted them directly, but had chosen not to. "They're pulling back," Wong reported, excitement creeping into his voice. "Returning the hostages to the building. The vehicles are being abandoned." Rodriguez was already updating command. "QRF 3 minutes out. They're deploying to blocking positions around the complex." Through her scope, Elena watched as the hostages were rushed back inside the main building. The separatists were in disarray, some taking defensive positions, others arguing about what to do next. The commander with the red scarf was shouting, but his authority seemed diminished by the targeted strikes against his equipment. "They're afraid," Elena realized aloud. "They think they're facing a highly trained sniper team that could take them out at will." "Well," Daniel said with a hint of pride, "they're not entirely wrong." For the next few minutes, they maintained their observation as the situation below transformed. The separatists had pulled completely back into defensive positions inside the building. Vehicle movement had ceased entirely. Through windows, Elena could see the hostages being kept in a central room, now under seemingly lighter guard as fighters concentrated on external threats. Then came the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. The QRF had arrived. "This is going to get complicated," Elena warned her team. "Stay in position and keep observing. We need to provide real-time intelligence to the QRF." The first helicopter appeared over the ridgeline, followed by 2 more. They maintained altitude and distance, careful not to fly directly over the complex. Ground forces would be approaching from multiple directions, establishing a perimeter before any direct action. Rodriguez's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Observation team, this is QRF actual. We need current status of hostages and hostiles." Elena provided a detailed briefing. 12 hostages in the central room, approximately 15 armed separatists, most now in defensive positions. Their command structure in disarray after the targeted shots. "Good work." "Observation team," the QRF commander responded. "We're setting up negotiation protocols. Hold your position and continue providing intelligence." Over the next hour, Elena's team watched as the QRF established a secure perimeter around the factory complex. The separatists, realizing they were now surrounded by a superior force, made no attempt to move the hostages again. Eventually, communication was established between the QRF and the separatists inside. Through her scope, Elena could see the tension in the commander's body language as he spoke with the negotiator via a bullhorn. The man who had been so confident and aggressive earlier now looked uncertain, glancing frequently at the surroundings. Clearly unnerved by the precision shots that had destroyed his radios. "They're discussing terms," Rodriguez reported, monitoring the communications. "The separatists are demanding safe passage in exchange for the hostages. Standard opening position," Wong noted. "They have to know it won't fly." The negotiations continued for another 2 hours. Elena's team maintained their observation post, providing valuable intelligence on separatist movements inside the building. Gradually, the separatists' position weakened as they realized the full extent of their situation. Surrounded, cut off from support, and under the watchful eye of precision marksmen who had already demonstrated their capabilities. Finally, movement at the main entrance caught Elena's attention. "We have activity," she reported. 2 hostages being brought out under white flag. The first 2 hostages, the aid workers, were released as a show of good faith. They were quickly secured by QRF personnel and moved to safety. 20 minutes later, 3 more hostages emerged. "They're capitulating," Wong observed, releasing them in groups to maintain some leverage until the end. Over the next hour, the remaining hostages were released in small groups until only the final 3 remained. The separatists, now reduced to just their core leadership, including the commander with the red scarf, made their final demands for safe passage. Elena watched through her scope as the QRF commander spoke with his superiors. Then the response came. There would be no deals for the separatists. Their actions constituted terrorism and hostage-taking. They could surrender now and face legal proceedings or face the consequences. After tense minutes of silence, the final 3 hostages were released. Shortly after, white cloths appeared in the windows of the building. The separatists were surrendering. "It's over," Elena said quietly, feeling a profound sense of relief wash over her. All hostages secured, no casualties. As QRF personnel moved in to take the separatists into custody, Rodriguez received a final transmission from command. "Observation team, outstanding work. Your actions directly contributed to the successful resolution of this situation. Return to base for debrief." They packed their equipment methodically, erasing all traces of their presence before beginning the long trek back through the forested hillside. As they walked, Daniels fell into step beside Elena. "Those shots," he said. "The way you called them, targeting the radios instead of personnel. That wasn't just good tactics. It was human," Elena finished for him. "There were other options, more lethal ones. But sometimes the best shot isn't the one that ends a life. It's the one that communicates something more important." 3 days later, back at the main NATO base, Elena found herself called to the commander's office. Captain Rivera was there, along with Colonel Walsh and a general she didn't recognize. "Specialist Vasquez," the general said as she stood at attention. "Your team's handling of the factory situation was exceptional. The intelligence you gathered and your decisive action during the hostage crisis directly contributed to the rescue of 12 civilians without bloodshed." "Thank you, sir," Elena replied. "My team performed admirably. Particularly noteworthy," Walsh added, "was your decision to target communications equipment rather than personnel. It demonstrated remarkable restraint and judgment under pressure." Rivera stepped forward. "The after-action analysis highlighted your strategic thinking and leadership throughout the operation, which is why we've recommended you for a special assignment." The general nodded. "We are expanding our training program for reconnaissance specialists with a new focus on precision fire support in sensitive operations. We need instructors who understand both the technical aspects and the critical decision-making processes." Elena felt a strange sense of things coming full circle. "Sir, I should mention that I failed to qualify at sniper school. My shooting skills—" "We're aware of your record, specialist," the general interrupted with a slight smile. "This isn't about being the best shot. It's about understanding when and why to take the shot, or when not to. That's something you've demonstrated you understand better than most." He handed her a folder. "Report to Fort Moore in 3 weeks. You'll be joining the instructor cadre at the school you once failed." As Elena left the office, she opened the folder to find her new orders. Attached was a note from Master Sergeant Reynolds, her old instructor from sniper school. "Sometimes the best teachers aren't those who found things easiest, but those who struggled and found their own path. Your shot ended a siege without a word. Now come teach others how to speak so eloquently. Looking forward to working with you, Instructor Vasquez." Elena smiled as she closed the folder. Her failure at sniper school had set her on a path that led right back to where she started, but this time, with wisdom that could only have been gained through that journey. The shot she never took at qualification had ultimately led her to make the perfect shot when it truly mattered. Sometimes failure wasn't really failure at all. Sometimes it was just the universe pointing you toward where you were truly meant to be.